It's the most violent small unit fighting in the history of American warfare.
We were just dismounting and all hell broke loose. The Chinese were in full attack mode.
Surrounded by Chinese forces, thousands of Marines' lives are in jeopardy.
The only choice you have is keep on keeping on until they tell you to stop.
With only one way out, they fight every inch to survive.
In order to stay alive, we do what we Marines do. Just shoot them.
Using authentic battlefield footage, cutting-edge graphics, and eyewitness accounts from the heroes who survived. This is the Korean War Battle of Chosin Reservoir, as never before told.
The United States Marine Corps will get out. It doesn't matter what the cost. You're not going to defeat us.
June 25th, 1950. North Korea invades South Korea in the hope of uniting the peninsula under communist rule. Coming to the South's aid are UN forces, consisting mainly of US troops.
The United States realizes if you want to stop communism in Korea, you've got to introduce military force, and in particular, ground forces. So by July 1950, American forces are fighting on the ground against North Koreans.
Within 3 months, UN and South Korean forces successfully destroy the northern invasion force.
The North Korean army has ceased to exist. It's still dangerous, but it's fighting a kind of pocket defensive, roadblock kind of war. And there's no question that now UN forces are there in a position to move into North Korea and to perhaps eliminate the communist regime there.
Commander of the UN forces, General Douglas MacArthur, wants to do just that. Seize on the chance to unify North and South into a democratic state. September 27th, 1950. MacArthur orders a force of 17,000 US Marines to cross the 38th parallel and go deep into the north to cut off the communist Kim Il-sung regime.
Our unit was, being a Marine unit and an amphibious unit, we would go to wherever we was needed. And after we captured Seoul, we went back aboard ship, not knowing what we were going to do.
November 13th, 1950. UN troops arrive at the port of Hungnam and advance into enemy territory.
MacArthur has begun to split his army.
So you've got the U.S. Army, you have the U.S. Marine Corps, you've got some supporting UN, mostly in aircraft, some British troops on the ground, and you had some South Korean troops.
November 24th, 1950. The force of 17,000 U.S. Marines arrive in the Chosin Reservoir region of North Korea, only 60 miles from the Chinese border at the Yalu River. Their mission, suppress any resistance from the remaining North Korean communists and push them across the border. Anticipating MacArthur's next move, the Chinese threatened to intervene on behalf of their North Korean allies.
China was speaking publicly, telling the United States, do not go into North Korea. Stay away from the Yalu, stay away. So the threat was public and the threat was real, but again, there's this sort of arrogance on our side of saying, you'll never do this, how dare you? They wouldn't dare challenge America and come into North Korea.
U.S. Marines and other UN forces experienced little resistance. They crushed the North Korean army, forcing them all the way up to the border. Confident they're close to victory, Marines from the 5th and 7th Regiments proceed north along the single-track road leading up the west shore of the Chosin Reservoir and into the village of Udamni. Among them is Sergeant Eugene Dixon of 1st Battalion, 5th Marines.
We arrived in Udamni. It was after dark on November the 27th. We were just dismounting from the motor convoy and all hell broke loose. We didn't know what to expect. We had to go into defensive positions and take cover as much as possible. There was bullets coming from all directions.
The Marines have marched directly into a trap. Chinese forces were waiting for them to arrive to spring an ambush.
We had not had time to get coordinated. The Chinese were attacking our front lines on the hills around Udamni. Chinese were really in full attack mode. They was yelling and blowing bugles, and they just came in waves.
Simultaneously, from the UN base at Kotori, all the way north to Udamni, the Chinese launch attacks on all UN forces up and down the reservoir.
The stakes are extremely high. You're talking about a division spread out in packets. That's really the key thing here.
The 17,000 Marines of 1st Division are a powerful fighting force. But now broken into small units, they're vulnerable to attack. And facing 120,000 Chinese soldiers, outnumbering them 7 to 1, the Marines are in a dangerous position.
If the division's together in a fixed point, you're gonna have an avalanche of Chinese to take them out.
But the Marines are spread dangerously thin across the reservoir. The Chinese use this to their advantage and seize the chance for a quick victory.
So the best Chinese chance to eliminate and annihilate the division is to defeat it in small bites.
There's no way that they can support each other, and they're just stretched out so long.
7 miles south down the road from Udamni, Fox Company find themselves under attack at the crucially vulnerable Toktong Pass. Private First Class Dick Bonelli isn't expecting the attack.
We lit fires to try to warm our meals, eat. And the Chinese could see the ridges where the fires were, so they knew exactly where we were. It was dumb.
The Marines had no idea. No one knew that this was going to happen.
2 o'clock, I guess, in the morning, it was like a New Year's Eve party. With the bugles and the horns and all of that, and then they just came. And they came, and they came. There was no end to them.
7 miles further south is Hagaru-ri. Held safe by the 1st Marines 3rd Battalion, it's the largest UN base on the reservoir. Hagaru-ri is on the one road leading south along the reservoir from Udamni all the way to the port of Hongnam, where UN ships and carriers are based, making it vital for the Marine supply line and a village that must be held at all cost. Stationed there is Private Bill Gotcher of Howe Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines.
We went out on patrol and hit our first Chinese. They absconded into the hills, and we came back to Hagaru. So we got back again about dusk, and the ground was now frozen at 20 below zero, so we couldn't dig holes. It began to snow.
The men at Hagaru-ri can hear the explosions 14 miles north at Udamni. Then the sounds close in.
We began to hear bugles, horns, bells ringing all around us in the hills. It was just kind of a dark glow out there. The snow was lighting the night a little bit, but there was no stars or moon or anything out. So we were just straining to see what was going on. We were using incandescent mortar shells to see if we could see where the Chinese actually were, that were way out away from our lines.
Fired from standard issue 60mm mortar tubes, incandescent shells are the main illumination for UN forces during Chinese night attacks. Weighing 3.7 pounds, these shells have a hollow tail stem containing the ignition charge and primer, while the fuse is encased in the nose. 14 seconds after detonation, the shell releases a pyrotechnic candle that burns for 25 seconds, lighting an area of 30,000 square yards.
About 20 minutes later, they had crawled up within hand grenade distance to our 3rd platoon. and all hell broke loose. About 2:30 in the morning, we ran out of mortar shells. So they sent 2 of us to get more mortar ammunition, high explosive, and incandescent. My squad leader said, well, we need more incandescent, go back. And I said, well, you know, there are Chinese over there. And he said, oh no, hell, they're dead or been captured by now. Go on back and get 2 more cases. I got to the house where we'd stored the ammunition, and there stood a Chinese soldier, and my carbine fired.
The standard Marine personal weapon is the M1 carbine, a gas-operated and semi-automatic weapon firing a .30 caliber round. It's the smallest and lightest of all rifles at Chosin, making it easy to carry and quick to fire during close-quarter combat.
His clicked and mine fired. So it fired twice, and he was still standing. I fired once more, and he went down. And I grabbed the ammunition and turned around and started to run back to the mortar pit. At which time, a big bang happened. It felt like I was hit with 1,000 needles, you know, and all at once, and the lights went out.
November 27, 1950, 11 p.m. General MacArthur's plan to take control of North Korea has hit an unexpected Chinese roadblock. All UN-held territories along North Korea's Chosin Reservoir are under attack, including their base at Hagaru-ri. There, a huge explosion knocks Private Bill Gotcher unconscious.
When I got up, I really was disoriented. So I didn't know which way to run. In fact, I didn't quite know where I was. And so I just stood there and standing upright, looking like a fool, saying, well, which way is the mortar section? And so I finally decided, and I guess it was the right way. So I ended up back at the mortar gun. My right arm wasn't working, and I had pain in my right shoulder. And so we lay there till dawn, at which time I went to the sick bay.
14 miles further north at Udamni, Sergeant Eugene Dixon is among those now trapped.
When daylight broke, we could see that we were surrounded. We had some artillery that had pulled in there. My first vision was the artillery was pointing in all directions. It certainly was scary. There was no falling back here because the supply lines, the road, as soon as we got through, had been cut completely by the Chinese.
The Chinese combat strategy hit UN forces where they're most vulnerable. In one night, they successfully attack and cut off 4 UN detachments along the Chosin Reservoir, one by one.
So attrition really was the Chinese center strategy. They knew that when we were moving north, it's not 15,000 troops in this bubble moving together simultaneously. They were stretched out. And the idea was to make breaks in the line and surround the pockets.
Caught off guard, US forces are on the defensive and in real danger. Their only hope is to hold off against further Chinese attacks, then break through the encircling forces and fight their way 78 miles south to the port of Hungnam and safety.
And the Chinese aren't stopping, so we've got to fight our way out of here.
Stationed furthest to the north, the 5th and 7th Marine Regiment's only hope for survival is to retreat down the main service road running through Hagaru-ri. There, Private Bill Gotcher and the 1st Battalion are struggling to keep the road open and desperately need reinforcements from Kotori, the next UN-held base to the south.
Every few minutes I was hoping, well, I hope this is all of this. I've had all I want. The only choice you have is keep on keeping on until they tell you to stop.
The best hope for victory for the Chinese is to hit the Americans with everything they've got.
To turn on the best of your men, you want to get it over with. Kill the Americans as fast as you can. So they threw their best shot. They took their best shot that night.
The situation in Hagaruri is now critical, and without reinforcements, they won't be able to hold out much longer. November 29th, 1950, 9:30 a.m. 11 miles south of Hagaruri, a new unit is formed. Task Force Drysdale leaves Kotori, making their way north through Hellfire Valley, the most treacherous stretch of the main service road. They're heading straight into the heart of the Chinese attack. Assigned to Drysdale is Private First Class Rayburn Blair of George Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines.
We jumped off early. Our top sergeant woke us up. We were covered with snow, except for a little funnel of open air where our breath was melting. And it was the first snow we had really been in. There were 900 in that convoy, and a lot of trucks and some tanks. And we had resistance from the moment we left the perimeter of defense. We jumped off and threw out protection on both sides of the road to try to wipe these guys out. As we fought our way up this road, we were losing trucks, we were losing men, and they were firing down on us from these high points. There was hardly anything we could do except to get through it as quick as we could.
Task Force Drysdale must get to Hagaruri before the base is attacked again. Without their support, the Marines there will not be able to hold out for another night. And if Hagaruri is lost, battalions further north will have no choice but to surrender. Everything rides on Drysdale's relief mission.
My buddy and I, Jim Story, were shooting. It had gotten to be night. We'd fought all day.
As it gets dark, the only thing Rayburn can see are the tracers being fired all around him. Tracer bullets contain a lead core. In the base, there's a pyrotechnic charge containing a mixture of nitrates and oxides. The tracer is ignited by the propellant when fired, producing a stream of light that burns for 1.5 seconds as it moves through the air, giving a precise indication of where the weapon is targeted and allowing for accurate aim correction.
We were shooting at the gun flashes on the side of this hill right by us there. And also we could see the silhouettes of Chinese going back over the hill. And so as I was shooting at these gun flashes, Jim wanted a better position, and he came up behind me. And as he got behind me, a bullet went between my chest and arm and tore out my clothes and burned and bruised me and hit Jim in the chest. He was immediately unconscious.
5 p.m. The 900 Marines of Task Force Drysdale are now themselves in danger of being cut off. During the firefight, their convoy gets split up. Rayburn Blair and Jim Story in the front part of the convoy have lost contact with the troops behind them. Bravely, they stay on mission and keep advancing through the Chinese forces to relieve those at Hagaruri.
When he came to consciousness, first thing he said was, "Mom." And he said it very loud. And it scared me because they're right here on top of us, and I couldn't see anything. So I got a couple of guys to help me throw him in the back of the truck. We just tried to move off, and had a Marine on each fender, and he would say right, right, or left, left, turn right. There was an explosion at the front of the truck, and I assumed that it was a hand grenade or a mortar, but it was something. The truck rolled off the side of the road, and it tumbled down, and all these guys were hollering that were alive on that truck. So we just called a halt on fighting. We felt like at this point we were going to die anyway. But we went down and drug all these guys out of this truck that we could get, and drug them back up on the road. So here we are, the truck's gone, and we're alone. They were getting closer, and they were throwing in hand grenades and all this. Jim was laying up on the road with these other wounded and dead. And I heard another truck grinding up that road. I could hardly believe it. But here he comes, no lights or anything. And so we stopped them, of course, and we put all our guys on top of their guys and moved out again.
Down to 400 men, the Marines of Task Force Drysdale are determined to make it through. Even as the Chinese close in, they know not only are their own lives in danger, but the survival of the whole Marine force along Chosin Reservoir relies on them getting through. Against overwhelming odds, Private Rayburn Blair and 400 Marines from Task Force Drysdale make it through Hellfire Valley to Hagaruri. Their presence on the base is enough to relieve the troops there and keep hold of it through the night. The following day, the Marines set out to clear the runways of snow and debris.
So they took some time at Hagaruri, and I think at that time they started feeling better. Chinese still attacking, but repelling the attacks, there's more Marines.
We were still just out here in the dark, trying to decide where we're going to get people coming on our side.
November 30th, 1950. At Udamni, the furthest outpost to the northwest, 5th and 7th Marines are engaged in their third day of fierce fighting. Finally, they receive orders to abandon their position and make their way 78 miles south, down the main service road to the port of Hungnam, where UN naval forces are waiting for them.
The orders came down that we would vacate the area, that we would get rid or burn any equipment that we could not carry out. The idea was that we were going to start attacking in a southerly direction, and we were not going to stop until we got there.
All 8,200 men with the 5th and 7th Marines must break through the encircling Chinese forces and battle 7 miles down the main service road toward the Tuktong Pass, which is being held by 217 Marines of Fox Company. The pass is the only passage out to Hagaruri. If they can't get through, they will die on the reservoir.
So the Marines from Udamni come down to Hagaruri, and the turning point, or really the one piece of terrain that was absolutely critical, was that pass. It was sort of like a hairpin turn around the road, and the Chinese knew if they could cut that pass, they control that pass, no one's getting out. And if they did, it would have been at a very hard price. So Fox Hill was of critical importance.
Even though they're hopelessly outnumbered, Fox Company knows they must hold their position so that Marines coming down from Udamni can get through. Private Dick Bonelli is on duty for the third straight night.
It was just like survival of the fittest. I had the machine gun by myself, and I've made myself a nest, or found a spot where the back of me were rocks, on either side of me were rocks, and I had an excellent field of fire. You'd hear the tap and you knew grenades were coming. They would throw grenades so that you would duck. The next column would spray with burp gun.
The signature Chinese weapon is the burp gun, given its name due to the sound it makes when fired. The Chinese burp gun is a copy of an earlier Soviet PPSH-41 submachine gun. As a short-barreled weapon, the gun is most effective in close-quarter combat. It has a high rate of fire, at up to 900 rounds per minute. This is an essential element of the Chinese fighting tactic of massed infantry attacks.
When they came out of the darkness, their uniform was kind of white. You do what we Marines do, we just shoot them.
In the hills with poor visibility, Dick Bonelli is left to man his station alone with his .30 caliber machine gun.
The machine guns did most of the damage. It was not scared. A lot of times when I fought with that gun, I didn't see other Marines. I didn't know who was close or who wasn't close. You didn't know that until the morning. But you heard a lot of firing and a lot of grenade throwing. So when everything started again, I had the gun by myself. Now there were Chinamen all over the place. And I was all over the hill, and then I get a group together. I must have been 20 yards from the top of the hill where our platoon was, and somebody says, bring that gun over here. It was my lieutenant, and the captain come up, so I brought the gun over. I laid in front of him, and he yelled over, are those Marines down there, which should have been the first platoon? And the answer was a burp gun. Went right over my head and got both of them. They both fell down on either side of me.
The Chinese have taken a crucial vantage point overlooking the Toktung Pass. If Fox Company is to retain control of the pass, they must regain the hill.
So when it got light and we were down about 25 yards from the top of the hill, we recharged to retake the hill. I would say you transform into another person. They call you a warrior, but actually you're a savage. When the time comes like that, it just comes. I just know that in order to stay alive, I had a job to do.
In the freezing conditions, Dick Bonelli's machine gun jams. In desperation, he's forced to reach for an unconventional weapon.
The weapon of choice was a shovel. They called it an entrenching tool, but it was a three-pronged shovel. They were out, we had them, we were trying to dig foxholes, but we couldn't dig in the ground, it was frozen. So the shovels were right there. And when it got close, a lot of them were young, they were confused, and they didn't wear helmets. So that was the spot of choice. And it got a little nasty.
December 1st, 11 p.m., day 4. The 205 remaining Marines of Fox Company at Toktung are at the end of their strength. The Chinese attacks are relentless. Their only hope is that Marines from 5th and 7th coming down from Udam Ni will arrive in time. If they can't keep hold of the pass, they will all die. December 2nd, 1950. 5 days into the Chinese onslaught along the Chosin Reservoir, 5th and 7th Marines, coming down from Udam Ni, finally approach the Toktung Pass. They hope that Fox Company is still alive and that the pass is open.
I did a lot of praying. On patrol, I would say a prayer before we engaged, and if you had a break, I'd say a prayer during a break, and then when it was over, I always said a prayer of Thanksgiving.
At times it was questionable whether they were going to be able to hold, but they did. But it was a tremendous cost. They had many, many casualties. If they had not held the Toktung Pass, it would have been really a disaster at Udam Ni.
The troops from Udam Ni swell the UN forces at the pass, relieving the pressure on Private Dick Bonelli and Fox Company.
A head popped over my rock, which was unusual. I didn't know who it was, and I said, who the hell are you? And he says, Marine from Baker Company. And then I looked around the back of my rocks, and you could see all these Marines, the green parkas, just going through the back of our lines, and I said, whoa, what a sight that was. And I had all this food I wasn't eating, so I gave the kid a can, and I was going to take down a box to my friend if I could find him. When I left my position and walked down this little drawer-like, bullets were flipping up in front of me in the snow. And I looked around. By that time, being shot at didn't even think about it. I took another couple of steps and whoa. Figure a big dump truck loaded with cement with a big iron poker on the front of it, coming at you at 120 miles an hour and hitting you in the back.
Private Dick Bonelli is shot and left lying in a foxhole fighting for his life, in need of urgent medical attention.
They took me down to the aid station. I don't know how I got down there. And I kept passing out. So that night, a priest was there, and I got last rites. And I put us on trucks. The dead were on the inside, what they could take, and the wounded would put on top. And we hit a roadblock. Going back, I says, man, there's no end to it. The Marines took me down. A corpsman checks you to see where your wound is or how bad it is. I saw the look on his face and my buddy's face. I said, that's it. That's it. Over. Tell my mother I love her.
Around him, Marines of 5th and 7th must continue to push through the pinch point of Toktung Pass and continue south down the main service road. Between them and their final destination of the port of Hungnam lies 71 miles of enemy-held territory and a series of UN bases, each holding out against massive odds to keep open their escape route. Their goal? Make their next stop 7 miles south at Hagaru-ri by nightfall.
When they left Udamni, they were gone. You know, there was no one left behind them. As they went past, they absorbed Fox Company and pulled them down together. So this mass of Marines along the road were coming back down and getting bigger.
December 3rd, the combined force of 5th and 7th Marines and Fox Company moved cautiously south of Toktung Pass.
All you can see is just the road. You can see the hills around you. You didn't know who occupied the hills. We had hoped that we could just keep walking, but we'd go a few yards and hold up, and then you'd be there until the hills were cleared.
On the open road, the Marines become easy targets, but now they're within range of air support from Hungnam. Calling in for assistance, U.S. carriers launch Corsair fighter bombers, along with supply aircraft with ammunition and food to drop to them.
It was always nice to see the planes dropping bombs on enemy positions. That meant there was progress. We didn't always have the air support, but when we had it, we were happy about it, and it helped us to advance.
This is one of the first times U.S. aircraft deploy a new ground attack weapon, napalm. In 150-gallon drop tanks, napalm, made from an aluminum-based thickening agent combined with gasoline, is the U.S. force's most effective anti-tank and anti-personnel weapon at the Battle of Chosin. Fitted with shattering and igniter charges, the contact detonation fuse is mounted in the mouth of the tank. On impact, the napalm mixture scatters and sticks to surfaces up to 250 feet away as flames burn at 1,500 degrees.
The bombs were maybe a quarter of a mile away. You know, you're not used to smelling human beings being burned alive, because the bombs would burn the whole bodies, clothing and so on, and the thighs would split open and the yellow fat would be there. And when you smell that, it was very offensive.
The napalm buys the Marines valuable time, keeping Chinese forces at bay from the column as it moves south down the main service road.
And the Chinese simply melt away. Like the sun melting the snow, they just melted away into the woods, the tree lines, and the valleys, and they were gone. They were simply gone.
7,000 Marines finally make it to the base at Hagaru-ri, exhausted and battered, but glad to be alive. They're now 64 miles away from the port of Hungnam and safety.
They were shot to rags, but they were bringing what vehicles that they had and their wounded and dead with them. And as they approached Hagaru-ri, they started singing the Marine Corps hymn.
Once they do get to Hagaru-ri, there is a change in the dynamic of the battle and a greater sense that, yeah, they're going to get out of there. This is going to work out okay in the end, provided we can follow through with this and continue our operations here.
December 4th, 7 days after the initial attacks from the Chinese began, the Marines can finally stop and rest. But their ordeal is far from over. They must still make the treacherous journey down Hellfire Valley to their next stop 11 miles south to Kotori, before they continue on 53 miles to their final destination in Hungnam.
So they sort of repaired the units as best they could, merged the units. I think that might have been a bit tough on these guys' spirit, but at the same time, that recharge from being there, I said, if we could make it through this, if we could make it to Hagaruri, we can make it out of here.
I felt like I'm probably going to die here, but the Marine Corps is not going to die. We will get out. I may not, but the United States Marine Corps will get out. It doesn't matter what the cost. They were not going to be defeated.
The troops assembled together to fight as one large unit to Hungnam. Even though they are now closer to their destination, the worst is still ahead, as they must make it along Hellfire Valley to their next stop at Kotori, the last UN-held base on the reservoir. Hidden in the hills, the Chinese are waiting for them. As soon as the Marines leave the base at Hagaruri, their battle for survival begins again.
We're going to fight our way out of this. We're going to survive this.
We all lined up on the road, 10,000 men, in a double file, going down the supply route. And there were roadblocks about every mile, so we had to wipe that roadblock away. And so we all stood in the road in the snow, waiting while whoever was point got rid of that roadblock, and then we went on to the next one.
Despite the Chinese best efforts to stop the troops progressing south, the UN force is now stronger than ever. The advantage is starting to shift to the Marines.
The Chinese had to move at the same time. So we're moving and they have to move. And it's harder to move a giant Chinese unit en masse. So thankfully that kind of worked in our favor because the terrain is difficult. So if they're using the road, they're behind us.
Still, Chinese snipers make every step through Hellfire Valley deadly. A chilling reminder of just how deadly are the bodies of the men from Reinforcement Unit Task Force Drysdale, who didn't make it through 6 days earlier.
We fought our way back down Hellfire Valley, which is that valley we came up in.
We ran across trucks overturned and Marines laying dead, 30 or 40 of them. And they were half covered up in snow now.
Every time they stop, the Marines know they present an easy target to the hidden Chinese firing positions. But following the Marine code, they will not leave a man behind, living or dead.
We picked up all the dead. There weren't any wounded left, and brought out truckloads of them.
The Marines lose vital time. They must reach Kotori as fast as they can. Still under constant attack by the Chinese, they are cold, tired, and malnourished, but they must keep going. December 7th, 1950. The retreating column of Marines coming along the Chosin Reservoir arrive at Kotori, where they join up with the last of the UN forces. They're now a force of 14,000 men strong. And just 53 miles from Hungnam, the end is in sight. Positioned at Kotori is Staff Sergeant Mannert Kennedy of Dog Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines.
We had no idea what was going on up at Udemne and so on, but to see those Marines coming through and know you had friends that were going to come down that road, it was heartening.
The nightmare isn't over yet. The troops continue on down the last stretch of the main service road. Their path still isn't clear, as the Chinese continue to engage in persistent attacks.
Now there were Chinese on both sides, but especially on the western side. They were shooting at us continuously, and we had no cover.
The Marines are a formidable force, but vulnerable to attack on the open road. With the weather robbing them of support from the air, they're subjected to heavy fire from Chinese snipers.
We're just going down that road, 1 foot ahead of the other, and bullets would come in.
To make it down to Hungnam alive, they must take decisive action.
We knew there were a lot of Chinese down there, and would we be able to get down that narrow road? Our company, the dog company, gathered. So one of the officers had the idea that we would go up the side of the mountain.
It's vicious hand-to-hand fighting in deadly terrain. But taking the mountain clears the way to the pass.
The Marines moved up, attacked, killed, and treated the Chinese.
You become stoic. You're going to accept your fate no matter what. You had almost a complete loss of control, which is not a healthy feeling for a human being. And the only way to regain some control was to try to break these roadblocks by killing Chinese.
The Chinese, too, are at the very end of their strength. The Marines' endurance finally wins out. Unable to break through U.S. lines and score a decisive victory, the Chinese, now under-equipped, starving, and exhausted, slowly disappear back into the hills. At last, after 13 days of fighting, the worst is over. The way is clear to the port of Hungnam and safety.
We feel we're out of it because when we got to the bottom of the mountain range at Qingnani, shortly after that, they had a train that was running.
On December 11th, 2 weeks after their horror began, the column of 14,000 U.S. troops reaches Hungnam.
Total elation, we were out. You know, man, we're out of there, let's have another firefight.
When the Navy leave with the Marines securely aboard, the port is completely demolished, so the Chinese can't use any of the facilities there. The UN forces may have retreated, but their battle to get out is one of the greatest accomplishments in American military history.
Chosen from the Korean War. It's this iconic battle really because of what they did. Again, it was impossible. It shouldn't have happened. They overcome overwhelming odds, not just in enemy personnel, but the freezing cold. They should not have done it, but they did it. They did it because they were Marines.
The world has got to realize, especially in Korea, that was worth saving.
I was proud. I was proud of the U.S. Marines and those soldiers that have been so mauled over there.
I was in the Marine Corps. They asked me to do what I had to do, and I did it, and I did it with the best of my ability to help the cause, help in the battle and getting us out of there. And there were individuals, there were true heroes in my mind.
Nobody does anything by himself, you know. Being able to count on your buddy and know that he's going to be there for you and you're going to be there for him is what makes it work. Belief in each other, that you can't be beaten, that you can take anybody on and win. That's what drives you. Can't let your buddy down, you can't let the Corps down.